I'm happy to take questions at any point from people. I guess probably the easiest thing is if you have specific questions about your own book or your own publishing place, it's probably better handled in a call afterwards. I'm happy to put my phone number in the chat at some point, and people can feel free to call me anytime. I'll put my email in there as well, and provide whatever resources I can for people. So yeah, I came in and took over for a gentleman named Mark Young, who had basically, not basically, who started Itasca about 20 years ago. And so he had been through, a lot of different technology leaps and different things with Itasca. And I came in the middle of August, and started really September 1st. So, I'm about 2 months in. I'm feeling like I understand the basics of most of what we cover, but we do deal with a lot of different kinds of publishers and authors. And I'm still meeting new people every day, and there's at least one or two things every day that I haven't seen before. So that's been exciting. But I think maybe the starting point is just to touch on a couple things that people already discussed, and then just sort of the baseline acknowledgement from me that I come primarily from the world of independent bookstores, and that's a challenging business and has been for a long time. Being an independent publisher or a publisher of any size is challenging, and being an author who's trying to promote or sell your own book is very challenging. In large part, I would say that that's due to obviously the number of books that are coming out in any given year grows exponentially, and it's to call it crowded would be a huge understatement. You can go to any genre or category, and there's thousands and thousands in even the smallest genres. But Paul had mentioned the silver bullet thing, and I think that's one thing that is sort of a dangerous thing. Most of the books that I've seen over the time, whether it was bookstores or even in what I'm doing now, when a book takes off, the question is always like, how do you replicate that? One book that I've worked with closely myself is Braiding Sweetgrass, which Milkweed published. It's been a perennial bestseller for a long, long time now, but how that came to be is really honestly a mystery. Obviously, the writing is great. Robin Kimmer is a great storyteller. I know she has a new book that's just coming out, but just on the face of it, if you give someone the facts of Braiding Sweetgrass, it is not a book that sounds like it's going to be a bestseller in any kind of way. It was over 700 pages when it came in as a first draft. We had an editor at Milkweed that did 4 complete rewrites, which is rarely done ever. But when that happened, 15 years ago, that was not really done much then. But it was really due to persistence, and what really made the book. It was not a silver bullet situation. It definitely was a word of mouth situation. And it got into the hands of people who just loved it and handed it on to the next people, and book clubs started to go to it. College courses started to go to it. And then it just kind of snowballed and self-perpetuated. But any book that takes off like that, no one knows how it really happened, or else it would happen all the time. And there is some mystery to it that I guess is one part maddening, but in another way, a good thing, because it can happen, and it can happen to books that seem outside the mainstream, that seem too slow or quiet. They don't have to be like bombastic or a bunch of bells and whistles. It still does happen. So with distribution is probably one of the weirder parts of the book world. A lot of people want to become an author or they want to become an editor. Very few people, I mean, I've never met anyone who's like, I want to get into distribution. But anyone who's dealt with books knows that there's so many weird pieces behind the scene. And whenever I talk to an author and they're like, oh, I wrote this book, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I'm like, well, the reality is that that's probably like, I don't know, a quarter, a third, maybe half of the hard work. And not everyone has it in them to be a personality that's going to become book talk or have a newsletter that gets huge reach. But I do think that everyone has some skill set in the mix that they can do to help their book, whether they're the author or working for a publisher. So those are the upsides. Like it can be done, but it does take a lot of work, a lot of work that doesn't just happen over the 3 months before a title launches or the first month. One of the great things that I love about small publishers is that the lifespan for most books from a big publisher really is about 3 months, often shorter. If they're not hitting bestseller lists and getting a lot of attention within the first 6 weeks, that book is, for all intents and purposes, dead. And I think one of the great things about small presses and independent presses is that's not the time frame we're really looking at or dealing with. It's the lifespan of a book, and that you can make things happen. It doesn't just have to be brand new. That first 2 weeks, 4 weeks, that's so important for major publishing houses is thankfully not something that we deal with as much. But the thing that I tell people often the most with this is it requires someone doing a tremendous amount of legwork. It doesn't have to be you. It can be a publicist that you hire, but you're going to need to hit all kinds of different avenues to get your book into. The other gentleman, I missed it at the end, but when he had said that word of mouth still does work, but that he's a publisher and he's in the business of selling books, not giving them away. I think that's very wise. But there are times here or there where giving a title to the right place. It could be a radio show host. It could be someone who is involved with book clubs, can prove tremendously valuable. And so it's about figuring out how you want to allocate your time, your energy, your resources, and maybe picking a quantity that you are comfortable with giving away in the name of advertising and marketing. Because often for most people who are involved in this, you're going to be one of the main people, kind of boots on the ground doing the work. And I had most recently been managing a bookstore. I know Paul's has been involved with Minnesota Center for the Book Arts. Milkweed's bookstore was in the Open Book building in Minneapolis. And when COVID hit, that store closed. I knew it was going to be closed for quite a while. And so I went and did chemical dependency work for a couple of years. And so as hard and frustrating as the book world was, I was thrilled to come back to it because, not to minimize what it is, but they are just books and it should be meaningful or fun. And I got really tired of having been involved in the chemical dependency world for 3 or 4 years and just seeing the wheels sort of spinning. Minneapolis and St. Paul are still in a very tough place coming out of COVID and George Floyd stuff and a whole host of other issues. But I just felt like we're not really making any meaningful ground. And the book world was something that I was very excited to come back to. So no matter the challenges that I'm dealing with or seeing, they're leaps and bounds ahead of what I've been doing for the past couple of years. So it's been really fun to get actively back involved with books in a really hands-on way. I'll say one other thing, and then I can sort of pause and see if people have specific questions or keep talking. But um, the book industry, I think, has been fundamentally broken in one way or another for a long time. And I talked to Jennifer um, recently, and I think one of the things that I said to her is often what we're dealing with is the reason why something is done a certain way in the book world is that that's the way it has been done. And we've done that for a long, long time. And I'm hopeful that some things can change. Um, that's one of the reasons why I took this job. I'm excited to work with first time authors. I'm excited to work with small publishers and help them find ways for their books to succeed. The interesting thing about that to me is that that can mean a lot of different things for different people. Um, success could be 1,000 books. It could be 500 books. It could be 5,000. Like the scale of it really depends on what people are doing. But I'm interested in helping people find ways to do that. And what I like about Itasca is that we we don't just have one framework in which a publisher or author can work with. There's different options. There's different avenues, and we understand very much that not all the same things are going to make sense for everyone. So for some people, we deal with some publishers who are not interested in dealing with bookstores. That's not their main avenue. We deal with some places who are not interested in dealing with Barnes and Noble. Like, not that it's completely a la carte, but there's lots of options and different routes to go, and that's what I've found really interesting. I see the question that came in right now. We don't have a sales team right now. That's one of my great hopes. I would like for us to be able to do more marketing and publicity. It's not something that they ever have had or do have right now. So yeah, it's more fulfillment stuff. Have I missed any other questions? I haven't been paying real close attention to that. So someone let me
No,
know.
no, not yet. Does anyone want
Okay.
to chime in with a question at this time?
Here's a quick question. So if a publisher was with Itasca, are you also then available through Ingram? I ask because every bookstore owner I know, when looking for a book, does one thing and one thing only, is pull up Ingram and see if it's available and if it's returnable, and if it's at the proper discount, and then bam, they'll might buy the book. But other than if those criteria aren't met, it's not going to be happening. So
Yeah,
are you with Ingram as well?
yep, yep. We do sell books to Ingram. Not all of our titles are with them, but we do send. Um, we have a buyer with Ingram who's great. We send all of our new titles to her, and we go back and forth with her and decide on quantities. One thing that I would say to people, if you're having a hard time with a particular store, is that Ingram has 4 warehouses, and depending on the geography, stores are assigned a primary and a secondary warehouse. Just because a book isn't in primary or secondary warehouse for them does not mean that they can't get a title. Sometimes either someone who doesn't exactly know what they're talking about or is just trying to shove you off might say that, but it's not the case. If Ingram has the book in any of their 4 warehouses, they can be transferred. They can get them from other warehouses. And we often pick a couple warehouses to start with just to cut down on freight, to be honest. But we send stuff to all 4 of them, depending on where the author is, where they want to tour, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we work with Ingram.
Hans, I see a question from Jerome in the chat about bookmobile and print on demand, and I think that is one of your options through Itasca, isn't it? Or isn't there?
Bookmobile does not currently do true print on demand. So Bookmobile and Itasca are part of the same parent company, and we're in the same building. And the warehouse that we use for distribution is also located here. So right now the minimum quantity that Bookmobile does is 25. So it's fairly close to print on demand quantities, but we don't do true print on demand.
Okay.
Um, my understanding of it is, and I'm not an expert on what they do, is that that is not something that they're currently looking to pursue because there are so many places that are doing it.
Yeah.
And I see the other, does Itasca work on a fee-based business model or a percentage of sales? We have fees attached to the sale of the books, and also there's a startup fee for a particular title. If people are bringing more than one title in at a time, then that's cut significantly. Um, we we do have such a range that in large part that setup fee is for dealing with like one-time authors, just so because it can be a tremendous lift time wise, for someone starting from scratch and not knowing what they're doing, just to get them up to speed. Everything from like what's a barcode, what's an ISBN, do I need to have a set retail price, all that kind of stuff. So we don't take a percentage of all sales. It depends on where the sales are going to. So Ingram and Amazon get a 55% discount. Uh, we sales that go directly through us, it's 37.
I'm just going to jump in here. I'm Kathy Groth. We do distribute through Itasca. I have a book, Sunken Shipwrecks of Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Hans, I'm on here to meet you because I know Mark Young well, and I wanted to meet you as well. But just for those of you curious about a distributor, we are so happy with Itasca. They have done such a good job for us because, like somebody said earlier, bookstores want to see you on Ingram, and we are now. And so they can see that we're legit. We're not just a small press selling on our own. And we have been very impressed with the Tasca. So I'm on
Um,
here, Hans, mainly just to meet you.
well, you know what? If I can interject for a minute. So, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong. Your book is like a children's picture book. Is that right?
It's actually more nonfiction. It's
Okay.
Sunken Shipwrecks of Lake Michigan for kids.
Yeah.
And it is a narrative nonfiction where, kids go out and they teleport to these different wrecks. But 90% of it is based on fact. And we've been, my luck has been in, oh, a couple others have talked about their niche, and hi, Robert Allen. We've met on SCBWI. His niche is definitely fishing. Mine is definitely maritime museums and bookstores around the Great Lakes and that sort of thing. And it has
Well,
worked beautifully with Itasca for that.
well, Kathy, that's what I was actually about to get at. I wanted to ask you because I know that like you published your book on your own, and I know that it's selling really well. Like, can you talk about what was your approach in, finding these places to sell your book, and how does Itasca complement that? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yep, exactly right. And like Robert said, his Bob Allen is how I know him. His is the trade shows and all such. Mine are definitely the maritime museums. I try to hit all the events going on around whatever Great Lake I've written about. I've done Superior, I've done Michigan. Now I'm working on Huron. But I worked all last summer to get into bookstores. And they always said, "Can I order through?" And it was usually Ingram. And my husband and I realized we couldn't just sell ourselves. We did a good job selling ourselves, but we couldn't just do that. So we got on with Itasca, and they're our distributor. And as soon as they knew that they could buy, not just from us, all of a sudden we seemed legit to most bookstore owners. And it really helped. So I just firmly believe that we self-publishers, as much as we'd love to sell ourselves, we do need a distributor.
Thank you for sharing your experience.
Nice to meet you, Kathy. And
Hi, Hans.
I'm happy to hear that you're happy with Itasca, and for other, I know we've got several other people who are on the meeting who have us. If people have questions, concerns, please let me know afterwards. I'm happy to schedule a call anytime with people who have books with us or people who are just interested and talk to them. The one other question I see is from Sarah. I don't think that the primary reason, it could be for some people, and Kathy just said that her and her husband decided that they needed to be available through Ingram. I would not say that the primary reason for everyone to distribute with us would be availability to Ingram. That is for some people, but we have plenty of publishers who the majority of their sales are not with stores at all. A lot of it is people who do, whether they're talking to businesses or schools and are doing more bulk sales and are handling stuff with drop shipping, where they're not really concerned with bookstores. That's not how they're choosing to spend their time and allocate their resources. But having a place where, we handle shipping from a lot of author or publisher websites as well. That's something that can be set up, and just not having to deal with that back end of it is a tremendous amount of time. And just with, the animal that we're all dealing with at this point, it used to be, we talked about Amazon, and Amazon is something to be reckoned with for all of us. But to me, it's really shipping stuff at this point. Increases in shipping charges and just the sheer volume of stuff that's being sent around this country is astronomical, and not having to deal with shipments either when they go missing or things are damaged, to have people whose job is to deal with that is of great value, I think, to a lot of authors and publishers. So I would not say that the primary reason for a lot of people who deal with us is just to do bookstore sales, because they're not at the top of the list for most people at this point.
So, Hans, something maybe you could comment on, because I know this is confusing to people, especially that are new to the wider world, is to differentiate maybe Ingram from your standpoint, which is Ingram Wholesale, and
Right.
Ingram Spark, which is
Yeah.
what a lot of people get introduced to Ingram as, and
Yeah.
people use the term interchangeably. So
Right.
maybe kind of differentiate those and how Itasca fits into that sort of ecosystem.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that, Paul. Ingram is a massive, massive company. And they used to do primarily shipping stuff, but that's changed greatly in the last 20 years. Their publishing side, and when I talk to a lot of friends who are in publishing, and more people are using Spark and using them as print on demand, the one thing that I would say at this point is that books are expensive no matter what. And a lot of the print on demand stuff is coming in quality wise at a place that I would not, without getting into my own personal opinions about the quality, it's certainly not uniform. You can get 3 or 4 different print on demand runs, and you could be looking at different paper, different covers. Like, the quality control of it is, the range is large. So, but yeah, people can use Ingram Spark to print. Ingram handles a lot of different stuff, but from my side, what I was talking more about is the sales channel. And Barnes & Noble uses Ingram a lot now. Bookshop.org, which is a website that's really taken off in the last 5 years, until very recently has done all of their sourcing through Ingram. I know they have opened it up a little bit, but still hugely, most of the books that they are obtaining are coming through Ingram. Ingram is a massive operation. And we deal primarily with trying to get books for our authors into particular warehouses that are easiest for people who are looking for their book to access. Because if you, like I said, they have 4 different warehouses. It's Oregon, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. And people do pay stores pay wildly different costs based on where they're getting those books from. So the main reason stores, it's two-part. Small stores want to streamline their bookkeeping and bills. That's reason number one that they're looking for Ingram. The second reason is to cut down on what used to be more considered like consignment or independently published authors or self-published authors. And so that it was an easy way to sort of cut some of that off. And again, like that's just sort of tip of the iceberg with Ingram. If people have other questions, I'm happy to talk in whatever level or length people want to about that another time. I don't want to bore people too much with just that, but
I saw Nancy's question asking about like the school and library market ordering too. Like what channels do those markets usually order through?
it's varied. Libraries primarily use Baker and Taylor. Baker and Taylor used to be another distribution place similar to Ingram. That's really downsized as Ingram has sort of exploded. Baker and Taylor has cut back. A lot of libraries use Baker and Taylor. We also send all the titles that we get. If it goes into full trade distribution, we send out through an Onyx feed all the metadata to Brodart, Mackin, Baker and Taylor, Ingram, Barnes and Noble, and so those are like, and Amazon. So those are like the main channels. So we do hit up all the places that libraries. The school market is tougher, especially on like grade school level because it's so district based, state based. It really varies wildly, but we do distribute a lot of books to schools. We do more, I would say, on the high school and college sort of like text adoption level, but we do stuff with grade schools as well.
So I guess another question, since you've been on both sides of the divide, as it were, that always comes up among publisher groups are the discounts, which you mentioned before, and returnability. Could you kind of comment your perspective on that? Because that certainly when we're talking bookstores, those are, as far as I understand, mandatory requirements, but not necessarily for gift shops or other types of retail outlets, or certainly bulk sales.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I've thought that the single biggest change that could be made in the book industry to help everyone, and it would certainly be painful right away, is to end returns. I think it's a tremendous source of waste. It leads to quantities being ordered by places that are completely ridiculous, and it leads to a tremendous amount of waste. I know that's not, some people say that that's never going to happen or isn't the most realistic thing. Returns are a big problem. I was talking to a publisher the other day who was upset. They're like, well, why can't you, we got dinged on this because a store ordered 68 copies for an event and they sold 5. Now, something obviously went really wrong with that event. I'm not exactly sure. I reached out to the store to see what happened, and I haven't heard back from them yet. Bookstore or other, not just bookstore, but any event orders are not necessarily things that we cut or moderate, like change quantity on. But routinely with initial orders with Amazon and Ingram, we modify the orders so they're reasonable. For new titles, sometimes we'll see orders from Amazon for 800 or 900 copies. If you don't sell 700, about 2/3 to 3/4 of that book, selling 200 and taking 600 in returns is disastrous, right? Like it just kills it. And I think one problem with the book world is that were always so obsessed with print run numbers and different things like that. And I'm like, the thing that people should worry about really is sales percentages, not the overall numbers. You have to find a print run that makes sense price wise for you. But I think if we were a little bit more realistic about all this and what was actually going out and not coming back, that would be really good. The one horrifying story that I saw when I came here is we had a UK publisher who reached out to check on how many they had, and they had 49,000 copies of the book. The author was convinced that he was going to get on a big TV talking spree, and it didn't happen. They sold like 600 copies of a book that they printed 50,000 of. Now, I don't know who in the mix lost all that money, but someone lost an unbelievable amount of money. So, I mean, that scale is obviously a little bit crazy, but, you know, I talk to people all the time. I'm like, if the price point makes sense to print 2,000 versus 1,000, that's great. And you can do it. But you better have a pretty good idea of how you're going to sell 500, not just hope. And I think everyone assumes, or a lot of people assume, that everyone that they know and have worked with and everything else is going to buy 2 or 3 copies, and that's not always the case. So you've got to have a pretty good plan for how you're going to get out there and what markets you're going to kind of hit to make that happen.
I just want to thank you for sharing that. Like, I feel like I've made some unwise printing decisions in my career, but like never to the tune of 50,000 copies.
Yeah.
So,
I literally, I did a triple take. I was like, this has got to be wrong. And I walked out to the warehouse and I was like, can someone explain what happened? They're like, we tried to tell them not to do this. They were insistent on it. And, you know, at some point they're going to have we've talked to them about recycling some of them. I don't even think they could remainder them at all. Like,
no.
a whole truck is going to be pulped.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. It was literally like triple take. I see so yeah, I mean, like Jennifer said, the quantity you print and the cost, it's a really tricky thing, right? And I also don't want people to be paying. I talked to a publisher a couple of weeks ago. It was like, well, we really wanted this book to look a certain way, and we went with this, and so what we paid for it is the list price. And I was just like, you can't do that, right? But they have 2 titles, and they're very expensive as they are. And I was like, if the equation doesn't make sense, the equation doesn't make sense. You can't force it. You mentioned full trade distribution. Can you tell us what other levels of distribution that you have? Yeah. There's basically 3 main tiers, but within that there's permutations that people can make. We do an option where people just do drop ship. So they send us orders and we ship them out, and the books also go on the Itasca website. We do just the Itasca website and Amazon seller. There's 2 different venues for books to sell via Amazon, and seller is where we actually keep the books. The books never get shipped to Amazon, and we just fulfill sales, and then full trade. And within those 3 tiers, like I said, there are some other options available. For an independent author to start working with us, the first step would be to talk to me. Onboarding process is pretty easy. I'd send you the contract so you can look at all the details. It's overwhelming for people who haven't done it before because there are choices to look at. So tell me a little bit about the book and what the plans are, and we could talk about different options. And then we get you into our system, which is called Stacks, which allows people to see quantities, see orders going out, stuff like that. And the other thing that I think is good about Itasca is that you're not locked in. You know, we're not going to keep anyone hostage. I understand how this business works. What someone hopes is going to work or thinks might work doesn't always happen. Sometimes people decide to go a different route, and I get that. And we want people to be able to make their own choices. So you're not locked into anything. You can have the books shipped to you, or if you're somewhere where picking them up makes sense, you can do that. So I think our great strength is that the options are varied and we're flexible because all of it is expensive no matter what.
Yeah. I appreciate your realistic attitude about all of this. Sarah, you've had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question, and I want to recognize that I have spoken with you, Hans, and I have
Yeah.
appreciated everything. Um, I'm I'm not a first-time author in the sense that I have done some self-publishing on KDP, and I have sometimes experienced some quality control issues. Not a lot, but some.
Yeah.
And they were coloring books, so it wasn't as big of a deal to me. This is a book that has text in it and a nice design, and I care very much about the book. But I'm kind of constantly going back and forth between three things. And the question that I posted, you started to address a little bit. Um, it feels a lot like no matter what price point I put on the book, the people that are going to get paid for the 10 years that I've been writing this book and the thousands of dollars that I've spent to pay editors and everybody else is either a publisher, a printer, a distributor, or a marketing person. And I feel like, how do I decide which is the person of those people? Since I don't get to keep my money, since it's going to go to one of those people, how do we figure out which is the best strategy? It feels like instead of buying one insurance policy, you have to buy all four, and then it's a crapshoot. And so, like, on the one hand, I've been really sold on the idea of going with this really good quality printer and having the book stored, and distributed by Itasca because I think, it's going to be advantageous. But then, someone else comes along and says, wait, hold on, I'm a real publisher and you only have to give me this much because you've done so much work. But we're going to use print on demand. And so instead of paying, the distributor and the printer, you're going to pay us. And then somebody else is saying, well, but wait, none of those people are going to market your book the way we're going to market your book. And so you can do print on demand and keep your book profits, but just give us a little bit and we're going to really market it like crazy. And because you've been in different aspects of the industry, I just wonder if you could, without trying to unsell yourself, because I do think there's value in, Itasca and using a printer, but can you kind of try to balance out the different advantages or pros or cons, or how do you decide when you are not a person who published a lot of books and had lots of experience?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you're right. There are a bunch of people grabbing at it, and there are people doing different things. If it were me, and I were doing it, the thing that I would want most is for this thing, whether I wrote it or worked on it in some official capacity, is for it to end up looking like something that I was proud of. So I would err on the side of putting that money into the printing and design of it to have it be something that looked the way that I wanted it to, is my starting answer for that. The other part of it is that I don't want to get in trouble with anyone. If a place's job is purely marketing books, I would want to talk to 3 to 5 different authors that they had represented in the last year, let's say. And I wouldn't want it to just be one person that they handed to me, because it can be that. I would want to talk to a couple of different people, and I'd want at least a couple of those people to be in the realm of books that you're putting together. So for you, that could mean wellness, could mean yoga, but different stuff like that. So it's at least in the realm that you're dealing with. But the overall challenge is, you're right. When you're trying to land, and landing on a price point is hard. I would say to people, the amount of paperbacks that I see now that are 17, 18, 19.95 and are of not really any material quality is a lot. We've kind of hit, there's not much that's under $20 at all anymore. So you do need the cost to be at a point, where obviously, depending on whether you're looking at it as a money making venture or as a venture where you're just not looking to lose, you need that price to be there. But I think having it be people need to pay for things, right? Like nothing's free. Whatever other worlds we're all a part of, um, things are expensive, right? And so trying to have a book be the cheapest price point just so you're not hitting people with sticker shock, I think often ends up biting people in the end, to be honest with you.
And could you just speak for another minute about the access that an author has by going with Itasca that they wouldn't have on their own? Like,
I
where are the
mean,
places that you get into or that you get me in front of that I can't do on my own?
you the biggest thing I do believe is dealing with the actual shipping of it. Like if you're going to handle sales yourself, at some point in the first couple of weeks, there's going to be one or two things that go wrong, and not even necessarily go wrong because of a mistake that anybody on either end of it made.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to take a lot of time,
Mm-hmm.
and the unraveling of it is not going to be fast.
Mm-hmm.
So dealing with UPS, dealing with USPS, and any of that stuff, I think for most people ends up being more than they want to,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're doing it effectively.
And my
So,
last question is, do you
yeah.
have a minimum amount of books that you will accept to be the distributor for? Like, does it have to be 500? Does it have to be 1,000? Was there any?
No, I mean, when people want to get us under, 25 or under, it's a really small starting point. If they
Mhm.
really want to do that for whatever reason, we can. But no, we don't have a hard line on it. Just because,
Okay.
like some people are not doing full trade and they
Mhm.
literally just want a place that somebody can go to a
Right.
website or call and order the book.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
I mean, I guess the last thing that I would say for us is that there are humans here. If there's something going on, if you have questions or whatever,
Right.
you're not getting put into some queue. I send support tickets to Amazon all the time and don't hear back from them about stuff.
Right.
But we chase stuff down. So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to jump in there, and that's what I was going to end with, is we checked out so many distributors, probably 10, 12, and we landed here because they were so friendly. And even though the Twin Cities is not a small town, it felt small town. We had personal phone numbers. We had back history on, hey, I used to vacation up where you live. And I mean, we both felt so connected. Every time we had a question, it was answered immediately. And starting the distributing process, I know you said it's a little bit lengthy. We thought it was very easy. And we've just been so happy. I'm not, Hans didn't get me on here as a little sideshow here. I got on to meet him, like I say, because the other guy moved, but we have been very, very happy, and it does have a very friendly small town feel, and they deal with problems and issues immediately.
And I just want to say, Kathy, thank you so much for like coming on and talking, because part of the problem is, you look stuff up and somebody says, oh, I've heard good things about them, or I've heard good things or bad things about something, but it's not often that you get to actually hear someone's real experience. So I really appreciate you sharing.
Absolutely. Well, and the reason we first initiated was we're from Wisconsin, and there's a bookstore in Milwaukee called Boswell Books. And so many people go through Boswell. That's where they do their launches. That's where,
Mm.
they do their book signings. Boswell was not interested in me at all because I only had my own website that I was selling through.
Right.
And I know you were kind of downplaying Hans a little bit, getting on with Ingram, but that was a big deal for us. If they
Yeah.
saw that we were legit and that they could buy through somebody other than just us, they were willing.
Okay. Thank you.
But I would just add that, the nature of this stuff is that there are going to be problems and issues. One thing when I started, and we've been working on this the last couple months, is I think when we send out monthly statements, they're probably best helpful for people who only have one or two titles, because and even with that, there can be some confusion. But if you have more than that, it was a real mess of trying to dig through and looking at what's what. We've been working on that for the last 8 or 10 weeks to make it better. We're going to roll out new statements when November ends. I think they'll be much easier for a lot of people. And so a lot of what the changes that have been made is direct feedback from authors and publishers that we're dealing with. There's no way to make everyone happy all the time, not even close, but we are responsive to feedback from people and want to make the processes that we're using, workable and helpful for people.
I'm sorry, I just have to interject, Bob. That's incredible that you've sold 50,000 titles. Is that everything combined?
Yeah, that's with all 6 books total.
That's incredible. You need to know that that's really good. Like normally children's books would sell like a few copies, 500. I mean, Hans, I'm right? Like 50,000 is incredible.
No, 50,000. Yeah. 50,000 is amazing. Yeah.
Bob has an amazing niche.
Here's a question from Josh.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. The book industry is much less. One good thing that's happened in the 20 some years that I've done this is that I do think that people are less focused just on. It used to be so New York centric, and different things like that. I think that has decreased a little bit, but so I don't know. I think the challenges that small publishers face are probably similar. It's probably easier in some ways in the Midwest because there is such a high concentration of stores throughout most of the states. You can get to certain parts of the country, mostly the Southwest, and the South, where there's a huge distance of miles without a lot of retail stores selling books. And that's for the most part not as true here. But so I don't know. It's a good question, Josh. It's a tough one for me to answer, honestly.
Okay. If I can add to that, then I'm wondering then, have you noticed then any interesting practices from any Midwest independent publishers to differentiate their books from mainstream titles? And has that influenced distribution strategies at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a couple things that I would say really quickly, and some of this is like if you have picture books or whatever, this isn't as applicable. But there's a small press called Noemi that does primarily poetry and some prose that has been very, very effective in getting.
What are they called?
Noemi, Noemi.
Noemi.
They've been very effective in getting their authors to speak at colleges. It leads to tons of sales that way. They've done really well with that. There's another place that Button Poetry is a local place that has you know, mostly chat books to start with. And I think through like really smart editorial stuff and finding authors who are charismatic, a lot
Yeah,
of those authors started as performance poets,
I was
which
going to
used
say Button Poetry is an interesting case. They have a really strong social media presence too.
yeah, they've been really smart. And it used to be sort of a slight if you talked about a poet as a performance poet or a slam poet or something like that. But I think probably in large part due to social media and different things, like performance poetry used to only be sort of effective if you were there, right? YouTube, for all the evil that it can bring in my 12-year-old trying to get to the bottom of it, has provided an avenue where it's not just people who are at an event. And so something like that can be really effective. So Button's done really well with that. Rose Metal Press is a place that came to us from small press distribution and has done tremendously well. They've got like a field guide to prose poetry, a field guide to nonfiction and fiction. They've done really well with anthology stuff. So I think, regardless of what it is, I think one mistake that people make, and right away you want to have the net cast as wide as possible, but I think it's really smart to find your zone and like hit that as hard as you can and really kind of exhaust it before you're trying to get in any possible kind of store that could ever sell a book.
Hans, what was that last one you mentioned with the poetry and prose?
Rose Metal Press.
Rose metal.
Yep. They are selling a lot of books, and it's almost all different anthology stuff.
They do also like hybrid genres, I think, as well. I just did an
Yeah.
interview with the author who did the Braille Encyclopedia.
Yep.
They did,
And
yeah,
she
that
and
book's-
she's in St. Paul. I've known Naomi for a long time.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Hans tonight?
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Hans, what specific services are proving most valuable to small presses right now that Itasca Books offers?
I think, I mean, a couple of really different things, but like I said, the best way for a small place to make money is through direct sales, right? Sales through Amazon, sales through Ingram. Those discounts are, it's good to have the book available, but the discounts really cut into it. On some level, you're going to have to do direct sales. So if that's business to business, if it's book groups, that can look like different things, but figuring out some way to do that. So places that have integrated their web sales with ours so they don't have to deal with the actual shipping and fulfillment has been one thing that's really effective. They are going out and doing marketing and that kind of stuff. Another thing that people use really effectively here is that we have a tool where people can set inventory can be really different. Like 200 copies for some people is going to last them for a little while, and that's not a number to worry about. Whereas some other places, once you get down to 200 or 100, they need to have already had plans to reprint. So we have a thing in our stack system where people can set any inventory that they want, get notified when we get to that number, and then they can start thinking about what they want to do with reprinting. I said flexibility is one thing. Like, despite being attached to a printing place, by no means do even a majority of the publishers that we're working with print with us. And so there's a lot of different avenues that people are using for printing. And I think it seems silly to even say, but knowing your stock is really important and being able to monitor that in a way that makes sense for you to reprint in a time frame that's not cost prohibitive. I see so many people have to spend money on rush shipping, rush printing, and it's just a killer. It wrecks so much other good work that you've put in when you have to spend extra money to get the same
Yeah, the
product.
profit margins are too low to begin with. You can't even.
Yeah.
I saw that we missed one from Nancy. I'm sorry. She was asking how selective you are in choosing the titles that you distribute.
There are people that we say no to, or people who, after talking to us, decide it's not a good fit for them. In some ways, there are titles where I think the person might not be making the best decision on pricing or whatever, or how many they're printing, and we still go with them. We are a pay to use. We're one of the things that we saw with small press distribution is that they were a nonprofit, and there are costs in this. So I don't shy from that. We didn't talk about Asterism, which is another distribution place. I'm very interested to see what happens with it over the next couple of years. It's an experiment, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen with Asterism and how it's going to go.
I'm not even familiar with them. What kind of distribution do they do?
So they're not taking on new publishers. They had a cap that they recently hit. So they picked up some publishers from SPD2. They're not doing Amazon sales at all, and they're not doing any returns. Which I think is, like I said earlier, I think is interesting, but as it currently stands, it does cut out a lot of different avenues to sales.
All right.
But yeah, I have said no to different things that I've seen that I've just been like, I don't think this makes sense for us.
Did we miss anybody else? Anybody want to chime in? Well, thank you, Hans. I really appreciate your time here. I know this is a difficult subject, and yeah, it's hard. It has to make business sense too. It's hard to talk about this sometimes.
Yep. I'm happy to take questions from people. I put, phone and email in the chat. Otherwise, you can contact, Josh or Jennifer, and they can give you my information. I'm happy to talk to people anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, everybody, I'll leave the room open for a couple of minutes in case anybody wants to debrief or talk a little bit. But thank you very much, Hans.
Yeah, appreciate it. Hope everyone has a nice night.
Thank you.
And it is always an interesting challenge talking about the business side of publishing, because especially for publishing author publishers, you just seem to get further and further away from the fun or the joy of writing a book. And that's why I think, here in MiPA, we do emphasize so much that, we are a publishers organization, because that part can be fun and exciting. It is certainly challenging, but that can be the fun of it too. Trying to figure out how to get all these pieces to work together.
Yeah.
Paul, was it you a couple times ago that talked about how to set a price for a book? Somebody did, and I wished I'd written it down. It was cost of printing times 2 or something. Was that
the rule of thumb is 4 times the cost of printing.
4 times? That's what it was.
But that's that's just kind of rolling in a lot of things, like, what is the discount that a bookstore is getting? What, margin is distributor taking? What do you want to pay, as a publisher? What do you want to pay yourself, your staff, your designers, your editors? And, at what volume does that all make sense? So it's a very inaccurate number, but I think it's something that gets a lot of people, especially new to the industry, off this idea that, okay, it cost me $5 a copy to print, so I can sell it for $8. No, you can't.
Right.
That's not going to work.
I wasn't sure if you said times 2 or times 4, but I like hearing times 4. That
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's, I think Hans made a good point about that. It's that challenge of, where does things get priced then? And it's like, yeah, if you're doing anything in, small production runs, either POD or short run, short press run, digital printing, yeah, you're going to be up at $20 real quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
if you're not bulk printing, that adds up real fast.
Yeah, yeah. I was earlier today looking at a thread on IBPA's Slack group, and people were talking about, Chinese printing or not for, for color books. And it's like, if you want to get that, aggressive price point, yeah, you're talking multiple thousands coming from overseas. It's just the only way to get the price down there. But it doesn't matter if you're only going to be able to sell 50 books. I mean, who cares what the price per book is? Because if you buy 10,000, okay, you got a great price per book, but you just pulped, 9,500 of them. So
Exactly.
I just
Price,
had
price point and profit margins.
I just had 2,000 books delivered on Monday, but in addition to the cost of the books, it was like $450 for shipping to get them shipped to you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then I ordered out stickers from Mom's Choice. I think it's about $1 a sticker. So I order stickers at 5,000 at a time. And the shipping with the bubble pack and the cardboard and everything to ship a book out. And if I ship one book out now, it's been going up the last 3 years. Now it's like $6.13 to ship one book.
Yeah.
Even with the mail rate?
You'll have to tell me about the mail. Yeah, even with the
Media mail.
discount media mail.